Have you ever trusted someone so deeply that you'd sign away your future without reading the fine print? Because you believed they would never turn on you? That's where I found myself one quiet Thursday evening, sitting alone in my study, a retired colonel with over 2 decades of service behind me and a peaceful life ahead. Or so I thought. The house was still. My German shepherd dozed by the fireplace. And then my phone buzzed. A video message from Sabrina, my wife of 17 years. She was supposed to be on a wellness retreat in Sedona, something about reconnecting with herself. But what appeared on screen wasn't self-discovery. It was betrayal, dressed in silk and champagne. Behind her stood a man I didn't know. She laughed, raised her glass, and said words I won't soon forget. "I've moved on, Jackson, and I've moved the money. You'll land on your feet. You always do." I closed the video. My hands didn't tremble. My heart didn't race. She had no idea that the man she thought she was outmaneuvering once led international operations under fire. And what she didn't realize was this: I had been watching her betray me. For months. Sabrina came into my life like a desert thunderstorm. Beautiful, unpredictable, impossible to ignore. We met in Washington, D.C. at a defense gala while I was stationed at the Pentagon. She was magnetic, an events coordinator with sharp heels, a sharper smile, and a laugh that made you forget to blink. I was 35, a decorated Army officer with years of field command behind me. She said I was the most grounded man she'd ever met. I told her she reminded me what the word spark meant. 6 months later, we were married. The first few years were golden. During my deployments overseas, she sent care packages filled with lavender-scented letters and photos from home. Between assignments, we traveled: Santorini, Istanbul, Quebec. When I retired at 50, I assumed we'd finally settle into a quiet rhythm: a garden, some wine, a slower life. I invested my retirement into a small private security consulting firm. It paid well. It was stable. I was home. But something in Sabrina grew restless. At first, I chalked it up to the transition. Going from embassy galas to quiet Texas evenings isn't easy for someone like her. She started signing up for yoga workshops, healing retreats, and business coaching programs that promised to unlock her inner entrepreneur. I supported her. I always did. But then the retreats became more frequent, the business plans vaguer, and the purchases harder to ignore. She bought a new Range Rover, said it was for safety, ordered imported wellness supplements in bulk, claimed it was for resale. Thousands vanished from our joint account. When I asked, she smiled and touched my cheek like I was being too serious. "Relax, Colonel," she'd whisper. "You've planned every minute of your life. Let me plan something for us." I wanted to believe she meant it, but habits formed on the battlefield don't leave you easily. I noticed small inconsistencies, receipts from restaurants in cities she wasn't supposed to be visiting. Wellness invoices with misspelled addresses. One day while folding laundry, I found a hotel keycard buried in a coat pocket. The hotel wasn't in Sedona or anywhere she claimed to be. It was in Phoenix. When I brought it up, she laughed, lightly, casually. "You're being paranoid," she said. It was from a girls' night out. One of the girls booked the room, not me. Her tone was playful, but her eyes never met mine. I didn't confront her again. I began doing what I was trained to do: observe, quietly, meticulously. I made copies of statements, flagged withdrawals, set alerts on our accounts, installed a secure backup on our home server. I even created a physical journal, something I hadn't done since Afghanistan. Every purchase, every trip, every unexplained expense. I wrote it, all down. Still, I hoped I was wrong. That she was just impulsive. That maybe I'd become too rigid. It's a strange thing, watching the person you love drift further from the version you knew. I remember one night in particular. She returned from a retreat in New Mexico glowing with energy, her suitcase full of herbal teas and handmade jewelry. She walked into the kitchen, kissed me on the forehead, and said, "You wouldn't understand what I felt there. It was spiritual." I wanted to ask more, but I didn't. I just smiled, poured her a glass of wine, and made dinner. Then came the day she asked me about our retirement accounts. It was over brunch. The question floated out like casual small talk. "Hey, do you remember how much we've got saved in that SEP IRA you set up after retiring?" I gave her a vague answer, and she nodded like it meant nothing. Then came more questions. How easy it was to access the funds, whether she was listed as a full beneficiary, what the early withdrawal penalties were. My stomach tightened, but my face didn't flinch. I'd learned long ago how to mask a battlefield instinct. She was probing, calculating. That night, I stayed up rereading every document she'd ever signed, cross-checking every clause. I realized she had no idea what protections I'd built into our finances. Like many things in our life together, she'd smiled, signed, and walked away. She was confident, overconfident. That too was a pattern. The final confirmation came a few weeks before her video message. A wire transfer notification from our joint account to an unlisted routing number. It had been camouflaged, a $4,700 transfer labeled as retreat expenses. But the account it went to didn't belong to any business. It belonged to a man. I didn't confront her then either. I simply documented it, folded the printed page, and slid it into the folder I kept, locked in my study drawer, labeled in sharp black ink, Asset Protection Contingency Alpha. Because by then I wasn't just suspicious, I was certain. 3 weeks after that final wire transfer, the ambush came, just not from where most men expect it. Not from the front door, not from a scream, not even from a lawyer. It came from a notification on my phone at 6:12 a.m., just as I was lacing my boots for a morning run. Alert. Unusual activity detected on joint retirement account. Please confirm a $148,900 transfer request. I didn't move. I didn't blink. My thumb hovered over the screen for exactly 4 seconds before I opened the alert and read the details. Sabrina had submitted a forged withdrawal request from our joint retirement account. The signature looked identical to mine, down to the curl and the J of Jackson, but I knew better. The request had been routed through an out-of-state IP address initiated just past midnight. While she slept soundly in a luxury resort in Arizona, someone, maybe her, maybe not, had tried to rob me blind. I called the bank immediately. The fraud team at Austin Federal had already flagged the request for expedited review. "Mr. Reid, we were just about to reach out." The transaction raised multiple red flags. I told them to freeze the account immediately and requested a detailed log of all recent access attempts. My next call was to my lawyer, then to an old Army contact, Marissa Chang, now a cybersecurity investigator who owed me a favor from our Kandahar days. By noon, I was in my study, reviewing the security footage from our home office computer. At 11:57 p.m. the night before, someone had remotely accessed my shared financial documents folder. An unauthorized user had used Sabrina's password, one I had watched her type more than once, to open the exact spreadsheet I had shown her 6 months earlier when she was curious about our retirement funds. She hadn't forgotten, and she wasn't working alone. I sat in silence for a long time, just watching the cursor dance through my files, downloading PDFs, scanning spreadsheets. Whoever was helping her knew what they were doing, but what they didn't know was that I had embedded tracing software into those documents, standard protocol for any secure consultant. Each time one of those PDFs was opened or copied, it pinged back to me with location, device, and timestamp. The pings were coming from a private co-working space in Sedona. I opened my drawer and pulled out the folder I'd been compiling for months. Hard copy bank statements, receipts, travel logs, all meticulously organized. I flipped to a tab marked Emergency Response and extracted a template I'd prepared but hoped never to use. Financial Misconduct Incident Report, drafted for court submission. I added the date and the new evidence. Then I slid the document into a new folder labeled Phase 2. When I confronted the bank with the forged documents, they escalated the issue internally. Their fraud director called me directly. "Sir, we've launched an internal review. If your wife did this without your authorization, it could be considered a federal offense, especially if the funds were being transferred to a third party." I already knew they were. I just didn't know who. Not yet. But I had a hunch. And in the Army, you don't act on emotion. You act on intelligence. Sabrina was counting on me to be blindsided, to respond with outrage, to shout, accuse, flail. Instead, I remained exactly what I'd been trained to be. Calm, observant, methodical. I didn't ask her about the money. I didn't even mention the attempt. That evening, she FaceTimed me from a glowing outdoor deck. In Arizona, the sun setting behind her. She was all smiles and ease. "How's everything back home, Colonel?" she asked playfully. I studied the gleam in her eyes. Calculated, satisfied. She believed she'd pulled it off. "Peaceful," I said. "Exactly how I like it." What she didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that the fuse she'd lit had already begun to burn, and I was holding the matchbox. The name came to me in a line of code. That night, after Sabrina's video call ended and she went back to sipping wine on her desert balcony, I stayed in my study, combing through IP logs and metadata from the traced PDFs. One of the pings came from a Gmail account that hadn't been anonymized properly. Rookie mistake. The account was tied to a man named Vincent Hale. I ran his name through my private vetting database, a tool used during my security contracts overseas. Within minutes, the digital mask started to slip. Vincent Hale, 41, registered business owner, in Arizona, founder of a transformational wellness company called RiseSphere, a polished website, dozens of photos with smiling clients, vague claims about emotional detox and financial alignment. But dig just an inch deeper, and the patterns emerged. Civil litigation for breach of contract, a failed veterans, foundation under investigation for misappropriation of funds, and a pair of sealed divorce records out of Florida and Colorado. Both ex-wives had filed restraining orders. Both settlements involved undisclosed financial disputes. This wasn't some new age spiritualist. Vincent was a polished predator, dressed in linen shirts and whispered affirmations. I picked up the phone and called Elias Monroe, former counterintelligence specialist, now running cyber forensics for a federal contractor. We'd trained together, in Kabul, trusted each other with our lives. I didn't have to explain much. "Send me everything," he said. "Give me 48 hours. By the next evening, Elias had built a full behavioral map of Vincent Hale. He flagged 5 suspicious accounts linked to Hale's known addresses, all receiving personal gifts or consulting fees from middle-aged women with significant assets. One of the accounts had received over $21,000 in the past 3 months from a shared account under my name. I stared at the spreadsheet. The transfers weren't even large enough to trigger red flags to the IRS, just small, careful withdrawals. 4,000 here, 2,000 there. Sabrina had been bleeding the account slowly for months, like a leech dressed in silk. And Vincent? He was the scalpel. But what turned my stomach wasn't the money. It was what Elias said next. "Jackson, you remember that nonprofit he ran? The Veterans Healing Retreat? Rise Forward?" "Yeah. Fraud investigation, right? Worse. He used it to gain access to disabled vets, mainly women and widows, promised to help them find purpose again. 4 reported emotional exploitation, 2 had financial losses. It never made the news because the settlements were sealed. But this guy's done it before." The air in the room thickened. My military code, etched over years in dust and sweat, burned in my gut. This wasn't just betrayal. It was desecration of trust, of honor, of the very people I'd spent my life protecting. Sabrina hadn't just run off with a man. She had invited a known predator into our financial and emotional lives. Maybe she was naive. Maybe she was complicit. It didn't matter. What mattered was that Vincent Hale had a pattern, and I was going to break it. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in front of a corkboard I kept in my garage workshop, leftover from my operational planning days. I began pinning photos, drawing lines with red string, mapping out connections like I used to in briefing rooms overseas. Sabrina's travel dates, bank withdrawal patterns, Vincent's location logs, previous victims. All of it painted a clear, chilling timeline. They met 8 months ago at a yoga finance seminar in Santa Fe. Within 2 weeks, Sabrina had opened a private checking account. Within 4, she had made her first withdrawal from ours. This wasn't love. This was a tactical infiltration. I gathered the evidence, scanned it into a digital vault, and then printed 2 complete copies, one for my lawyer, one for the district attorney if it ever came to that. Before shutting down my computer, I paused on a headshot of Vincent taken from his business profile. He had the kind of smile that made weak men trust him and strong women second-guess themselves. But I saw through it. He wasn't a mystery. He was a blueprint, a manipulator of the most insidious kind, one who wore charm like body armor and weaponized empathy for access. I shut the laptop and whispered to myself, "You've danced with civilians before, Vincent. Let's see how you do against a colonel." Because this wasn't just personal anymore. This was war. By the following Monday, my operation was fully underway, not in the chaos of combat zones or shadowy overseas missions, but in conference calls, encrypted emails, and legal preparation. The battlefield had changed, but the strategy remained the same. Gather intelligence, secure the perimeter, strike with precision. I met with my attorney, Daniel Green, a no-nonsense former JAG officer who now handled high-asset divorce and fraud litigation. We had served together briefly in Germany. He was the kind of man who read court filings like battle maps. After reviewing my compiled dossier on Sabrina and Vincent, he let out a long breath and said flatly, "This isn't just a divorce. This is premeditated financial misconduct. And he's a repeat offender." I slid over a file labeled Target Profile v. Hale. Inside were photographs, financial records, and evidence Elias had compiled. "He's running a pattern, Daniel. Grooming wealthy women, draining their assets, moving on. Sabrina may be his 4th, possibly 5th documented case." Daniel adjusted his glasses. "Then we go beyond divorce court. We initiate a dual-track strategy, civil and criminal. We'll file for divorce, yes, but also initiate a fraud investigation. This guy's left enough breadcrumbs to feed a platoon." Within 48 hours, subpoenas were being drafted. My accounts were locked down tighter than a forward operating base, and my legal team had assembled a full digital forensic report, courtesy of Elias. I made an official report to the district attorney's office in Bezar County, submitting evidence of forged documents, unauthorized withdrawals, and the ongoing manipulation by Vincent Hale. But I wasn't just thinking about my own case anymore. Vincent's scheme didn't start with Sabrina, and it wouldn't end with her unless someone drew a line. I reached out to 2 of his prior victims, names Elias had unearthed. One was a nurse in Jacksonville, the other, a widowed teacher from Boulder. Both had been humiliated, manipulated, and ultimately silenced through legal settlements. Neither had ever pressed charges. Both were shocked to hear from me. "This isn't about reopening old wounds," I told them. "It's about stopping a predator. You're not alone anymore." Surprisingly, they agreed. They sent over documentation, even voice memos and messages Vincent had sent them, nearly word for word identical to the ones Sabrina had received. It was a pattern, clear, deliberate, disgusting. We compiled it all. 3 women's testimonies, bank records, emails, timestamps, VPN traces. My lawyer contacted the U.S. Attorney's Office through a retired federal investigator he knew. Suddenly things moved quickly. Vincent's name was added to an open fraud investigation into illicit financial activity across multiple states. A quiet watch was placed on all his known accounts. But I wasn't finished. I filed an anonymous complaint with the Arizona Department of Consumer Affairs against RiseSphere, his so-called wellness brand. A second tip, routed through encrypted VPN, was sent to the state's nonprofit fraud division regarding his old Veterans Foundation. I knew the signs of structural corruption, funds transferred to shadow companies, fake consulting invoices, shell corporations. I'd hunted warlords who operated the same way, just with fewer crystals and more rifles. Back in San Antonio, I began preparing my personal front. Sabrina hadn't returned from Sedona, but I knew she would soon. Her silence meant she believed she'd won, that the funds had cleared. that I was quietly licking my wounds, I replaced the locks on the ranch house, secured all valuables, installed new security cameras. I moved important documents, passports, birth certificates, property deeds, into a fireproof safe bolted to the floor beneath the closet in my study. And I waited. A week later, I received a text. Just 4 words. We need to talk. I didn't answer. 2 hours later, another one. I'm flying back tonight. Please don't do anything rash. Let's be civil. Rash? Civil? The irony of those words, sent by a woman who had quietly siphoned nearly 2 decades of savings, landed like an insult. But I didn't engage. I forwarded the message to Daniel. Document it, I said. That night, I walked the perimeter of my property under the Texas stars, the way I used to do during night patrols in Mosul. Not because I was afraid, but because I was focused, locked in. I wasn't chasing revenge. I was enforcing justice with discipline, precision, and zero emotion. This was my home, and now it was fortified. She arrived just after 6 a.m. The black SUV pulled into the gravel driveway like it belonged there, but the woman who stepped out no longer did. Sabrina looked like a shadow of the version she had curated on her social media feeds. Wrinkled clothes, eyes swollen from lack of sleep or perhaps too many tears. Her usual gloss and polish had faded, replaced with something closer to panic than poise. She didn't knock. She banged on the door. I didn't move. I let her wait. When I finally opened it, I said nothing, just looked her in the eye, expressionless. She brushed past me like she still had the right, stepping into the kitchen, scanning the room as if trying to measure how much damage she'd done. Why are the accounts locked? She demanded. Why can't I access anything? The bank says, there's a fraud investigation. I stood still, arms crossed. There is. Her voice cracked into a laugh, sharp and empty. I'm your wife, Jackson. I don't need your permission to access our money. You think you can just freeze me out? No, I said calmly. You forged my signature to empty our retirement. That's fraud, whether you're my wife or not. Her eyes widened. The mask, what little remained, slipped. She paced the room. You can't prove that. I don't need to, I said, walking over to the counter where a folder lay waiting. The bank has the documentation. The court will have it too, along with your video message and the full record of every transfer to Vincent Hale's accounts. Color drained from her face. She stepped back, voice quieter now. This was a mistake. I didn't think it would go this far. Vincent told me. I cut her off. Told you what? That draining our savings was spiritual liberation? That forging documents is an act of empowerment? You weren't lied to, Sabrina. You made a choice. Her tone changed. She moved closer, voice suddenly soft, almost pleading. Jackson, please, I know I messed up, but we can fix this. We've been through worse, haven't we? You and me, we were solid once. I looked at her, and for a fleeting second I saw the woman I married, the one who stood beside me when I retired, who held my hand when I buried my father. But I also saw the woman who had spent the last 8 months siphoning off our lives, work smiling as she did it. There's no we anymore, I said. I filed for divorce last week. You'll be served this afternoon. Any further communication should go through my attorney. Her face hardened instantly. The softness vanished. You think you'll come out clean from this? You think your boring, overplanned life made you successful? I built your image. I gave you social value. Without me, you're just another lonely vet with a pension and a dog. I almost smiled. Not because it wasn't meant to cut deep, it was, but because it was so predictably desperate. And yet, I said quietly, somehow I managed to protect every last dollar from your little awakening. The retirement funds you tried to take? Flagged. Frozen. Under investigation. She swallowed hard. There was over $500,000 in that account. No, I corrected. There was $180,000 in that account. The rest, your half, really, was moved into assets you signed, off on 2 years ago but never understood. LLCs, irrevocable trusts, corporate holdings you can't touch. Her hand trembled as she reached for her phone, fingers fumbling through banking apps, passwords, balance checks. Her breaths grew shorter. "Where is it?" she hissed. "Where is my money?" I stepped away. "In places you can't reach." The fury rose then. She hurled her phone against the wall where it bounced harmlessly off a stud and landed face down on the tile. "You think you've won? Vincent has more money than you ever will. He's connected. He'll fix this." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't flinch. I just met her eyes one last time. "Then you've landed on your feet," I said, echoing her own words from the video. "But you'll be doing it without the money you tried to steal, and possibly with a criminal record." The hearing was scheduled 2 weeks after the confrontation at the ranch. My attorney, Daniel, had filed the divorce papers with supporting documentation of fraud, and the DA's office had begun a parallel investigation into Vincent Hale. Things moved faster than expected, largely because everything had already been built like a military operation. Evidence cataloged, witnesses contacted, statements verified. My systems had been in place before Sabrina ever clicked record on her goodbye video. I walked into the courthouse in downtown San Antonio wearing a charcoal suit, not my uniform, but still military in posture. Calm, controlled, resolved. Sabrina arrived shortly after, visibly worn yet still trying to wear the image she'd always curated. Flawless hair, elegant dress, polished heels. But her eyes darted too much. She was nervous. Vincent, however, looked bored. He sat beside her, legs crossed, wearing a fitted beige blazer over a designer t-shirt. No tie, no concern. Until the evidence began. Daniel stood. "Your Honor, we are submitting documented evidence of financial fraud, including forged authorization forms, transfers of marital funds to a third party, and testimony from multiple individuals previously targeted by said third party, Mr. Vincent Hale." The judge, an older Latina woman with steely eyes and the patience of a surgeon, leaned forward. "Proceed." What followed was, by courtroom standards, devastating. Elias's reports were laid out. Timeline spreadsheets, PDF tracing logs, phone records. Sabrina's own video message played on a monitor as Vincent visibly stiffened in his seat. Then came the testimony, video depositions from the nurse in Jacksonville and the teacher in Boulder, each detailing how they had met Vincent through wellness or business retreats, how he had convinced them to open new bank accounts, how he slowly cut them off from their financial stability under the guise of self-empowerment and spiritual growth. The stories mirrored mine to an unsettling degree. Different women, same script. I watched the judge's eyes narrow with each piece of testimony. Then she turned to Vincent. "Mr. Hale," she said coolly, "the court has reason to believe that you are engaged in a pattern of financial exploitation, crossing state lines, and involving multiple victims. This case will be referred to the District Attorney's Office for Criminal Investigation. Furthermore, all marital assets involved in this case are to be frozen pending a full audit." For the first time, Vincent lost his composure. He leaned into his attorney's ear, whispering urgently. Sabrina's expression shifted from confused to betrayed. She turned to him, lips moving, but no sound came out. He didn't look at her. His gaze remained fixed on the judge, and just like that, the illusion broke. In that moment, she knew. She wasn't special. She wasn't different. She was just another mark. Another name on a spreadsheet of women whose emotions had been leveraged into silence and savings accounts. By the time we exited the courtroom, Sabrina no longer walked beside Vincent. She trailed behind him like someone waking up from a long, expensive dream. That evening, I received a call from the DA's office. Sabrina had come in voluntarily. She offered full cooperation in exchange for reduced charges. Emails, screenshots, passwords, even a voice recording of Vincent coaching her through the financial authorization forms. Some of this, the investigator told me, is enough to build a federal case. I thanked them, not out of vengeance, but out of something cleaner. Clarity. 2 days later, I got another call. One of Vincent's previous victims had shared our collective findings with an online forum for women defrauded in spiritual business partnerships. Within 72 hours, 4 new cases had surfaced. Vincent's name was now flagged in a national financial misconduct database. But the most powerful moment came quietly, outside the courthouse a week later. A woman approached me, mid-40s, conservative dress, trembling hands. She said she was the widow of a Navy corpsman. Vincent had tried to recruit her into a healing investors circle last year. She'd refused. Barely. I always felt something was off, she said. But I couldn't prove it. You did. Thank you. I shook her hand and nodded. You were your own shield. I just confirmed your instincts. That night I sat at my desk updating my files. The folder labeled Contingency Alpha had been closed and archived. In its place I opened a new one, Justice Active. Because this wasn't about just surviving betrayal anymore. It was about stopping it from happening again. 6 months later, the sun rose over San Antonio just like it always had. But the world, I woke up and felt entirely different. Not because the sky had changed, but because I had. The legal battles were behind me. The fraud investigation into Vincent Hale had expanded into a multi-state operation. With Sabrina's cooperation, authorities uncovered a network of fake businesses and manipulated bank accounts across 4 jurisdictions. Last I heard, Vincent was facing indictments in both Arizona and Colorado, with the potential for federal charges pending. Sabrina had accepted a plea deal. She avoided jail time, but agreed to make restitution over the next 10 years. She had sold the SUV, closed her personal accounts, and, according to Daniel, moved back in with her mother in Nevada. She issued a formal written apology through her attorney, not for me I knew, but for the court. It didn't matter, I wasn't waiting on remorse, I had already let it go. As for me, I'd gone back to what I knew best: discipline, structure, and meaningful work. I had resumed my consulting, firm on a limited basis, specializing in security assessments for nonprofits and small businesses. I also launched a new initiative, quietly and without publicity, to educate retired veterans and widows on financial self-defense. Not a seminar, not some grand performance, just one-on-one guidance, the kind of thing no one ever taught us. In the military, how to read bank terms, how to protect assets from predatory schemes disguised as investments or spiritual partnerships. Most days were spent at the ranch, repairing the fencing, tending to the land, finding peace in routine. There was comfort in simplicity. There was healing in silence. My dog Ranger kept me company, and for the first time in years I heard the birds before I heard my thoughts. That's how I knew I was getting better. I didn't retreat from people. In fact, I found myself more open, just more selective. There was a woman, Natalie. We met through a mutual friend at a veterans charity fundraiser. She was a project manager for a logistics firm, smart, thoughtful, with a dry wit and eyes that didn't lie. We started slowly, no expectations, no rushing. We talked about life, work, things we'd both lost. She never asked me to explain what happened with Sabrina. She simply said, "If you ever feel like talking about it, I'm here. If not, I'm still here." I'd forgotten how powerful quiet honesty could be. One evening, we shared coffee on the back porch as the sun dipped below the mesquite trees. I told her part of the story, not everything, just enough. She didn't judge. She didn't flinch. She just listened. That was all I needed. In my study, I kept one framed photo from my marriage, Sabrina and me on our honeymoon in Italy standing in front of Lake Como. We were both smiling, both unaware of how many versions of ourselves we'd yet to become. I didn't keep it out of sentimentality or bitterness. I kept it as a reminder not of betrayal but of blind trust, a lesson carved into me the way time carves stone. Every document now bears a second review. Every agreement, business or personal, is approached with clarity, not just faith. It's not that I became cold, I became awake, and perhaps that's the most important thing to say now, that survival isn't just about making it through. It's about how you rise after being broken. Betrayal didn't destroy me, it sharpened me. It exposed my vulnerabilities, yes, but it also reminded me that emotional resilience isn't something you're born with. It's forged in the fire of experience. I am not the man who believed love meant lowering your guard. I'm the man who now understands that true connection doesn't require blindness. It requires balance. To be honest, I don't think about Sabrina much anymore. When I do, it's not with anger. It's with distance, like remembering a storm that passed through. One summer, loud, sudden, but temporary. The house stood, the roots held. And today, under the same roof she once tried to gut, I've built something stronger. A life not dictated by fear or control, but by clarity, purpose, and peace. Justice was served in the courtroom. But freedom, that was found in the quiet work of rebuilding myself. Brick by brick, thought by thought, and no one can take that from me again. Colonel Jackson Reid's story isn't just about betrayal or revenge. It's a masterclass in how to face emotional sabotage with discipline, intelligence, and unwavering moral clarity. While others might have reacted with chaos, he chose strategy. Where most would lash out, he planned. He reminded us that true power lies not in shouting, but in preparing, calmly, silently, and effectively. In an age where manipulation often wears a charming smile, his journey shows us the importance of vigilance, especially for those who've spent a lifetime protecting others but forgot to guard themselves. He didn't just fight back, he built a system, exposed a predator, and helped prevent future victims. That's not just personal justice. That's social responsibility in action. And maybe that's the lesson for all of us. Never assume love exempts you from scrutiny. Trust, like respect, must be earned and continuously re-earned. So now let me ask you this. Have you ever overlooked the signs, only to realize too late that something didn't add up? Tell me in the comments, what would you have done in Jackson's shoes? If this story moved you or made you think differently about trust, preparation, or relationships, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear it. You never know who you might protect by simply passing on the truth.